Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Kellen with Apex Archery, bringing you another in our longer axle-to-axle flagship hunting bow series for 2025. Today in for testing, we do have the Hoyt AX-2 32 featuring those new HPX Gen 4 cams and an updated draw length adjustment module system, said to get a little bit more speed out of this platform. Can't wait to get this thing in for testing. Let's get into it. All right, welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today with the Hoyt AX-2 32 in for testing. This is Hoyt's premier aluminum flagship offering for this year. Earlier this year, we did have in for testing the RX-9 Ultra, which is their carbon offering with a slightly longer axle-to-axle measurement. This particular bow is coming in with a claimed ATA spec of 32 and 5/16 of an inch, a brace height of 6.5 inches, a claimed system weight, again, for this aluminum risered version of 4.5 pounds, accommodating draw lengths from 26 out to 31 inches. It has a claimed ATA speed rating of 336 feet per second, and all of that coming to you for $1,549. Before we actually dig into the specs for this particular bow, I want to pause and give a quick shout out and thank you to Bear Creek Archery in Inglewood, Colorado. They are not only the de facto sponsor of this channel, loaning us all of the bows that we've had in for testing so far this year, it's also the archery shop that I trust for all of my archery needs. If you happen to be in Colorado or traveling through, please go visit my friends over at Bear Creek Archery. All right, let's dig into the actual specs of this bow because, again, very excited to get outside and begin shooting on the range. The first thing we're going to do is verify that axle-to-axle measurement, looking for 32 and 5/16 of an inch. And if I measure from the center of that through axle to the exact same on the other side, this one is actually coming in just a little bit long. It's at about 32 and 11/16 of an inch. Next, let's look into that brace height, which is that measurement from the deepest part of the throat of the grip out to the center of that string. And on this particular bow, it is coming in just a little bit long. I would actually call it about 6 and 11/16, so a little bit beyond that 6.5 inch brace height that they are claiming. Next, let's look into the overall riser geometry for this bow. Fans of the channel will note that I prefer a longer riser relative to an axle-to-axle measurement. I think of the riser itself as my vertical orientation stabilizer, which really increases stability when you are on target and you are at full draw and executing that shot. So we are going to measure through the pivot point, which is the last point that the limbs themselves are actually suspended or supported on those limb pockets. And this one is coming in at 29 inches. That's actually relatively short relative to that axle-to-axle. That gives us a riser to axle ratio of just 89.1%. Next, let's look into the reflex measurement. So if we use that exact same pivot point, we will measure again from that forward angle to the deepest part of the throat of the grip. Again, a shorter reflex measurement thought by some to reduce the impact that torque has on final arrow placement in the shot. And this one is coming in at exactly 2 inches for reflex. So, getting to the longer side, but really in keeping with a lot of the hunting bow models that we're seeing out in the market so far this year. All right. Next, let's look into the overall weight of the bow. They are claiming just 4.5 pounds with that 29-inch riser in aluminum. I have removed the lower mount stabilizer. We'll get weights both with and without so that you have a sense for what you might expect depending on how you want to configure and shoot your bow. So without, placing it on our hand scale here, this one is coming in very close. It is actually at 4.60 pounds, so just 1/10 of a pound over that claimed 4.5 pound system weight. If we attach that shorter stabilizer to that bottom mounting position there, and this is how I'm actually going to shoot the bow when I get out on the range. Again, a lot of the engineers claiming that they designed it to be shot that way. It'll help kill some of the vibration because of the rubber and elastomer in those lower mount stabilizers. And that is going to add about 0.26 pounds. So that bow with that stabilizer coming in at 4.86. Last, let's go ahead and look into the limb stance width. A lot of the manufacturers in years past claiming that the wider that limb stance, the more stable the bow is at draw. Using our calipers here. And this is coming in at 2 13/16 of an inch. All right, with all of that verified, let me throw a rest on this bow. Meet me out on the range where I'm very excited to give you my very first shooting impressions. All right, we are stepping outside with our AX-2 32 from Hoyt with those HBX Gen 4 cams. This has been set to my preferred shooting preferences, that is 70 pounds of peak draw weight, 80% by way of let off, and 30 inches of draw length. Excited to run some arrows through this and give you my very first shooting impressions. So the draw cycle is relatively smooth, maybe a little bit more aggressive than some of the cam systems we've seen from Hoyt in the past, but we saw that with the other bow from them that we had on test so far this year. Nice string angle, easy to find the reference point on my nose, especially for a 32-inch axle-to-axle bow. Not much as far as vibration coming out of that system. A little bit of forward movement or hop on the actual shot, but again, you know, the bow is completely stripped down other than that lower position stabilizer that does come stock and standard with the bow. And already getting used to that new draw force or draw cycle from that new cam system. The back wall, quite solid. If I really give it, I can get a couple millimeters out of it, but I think, you know, if you like a solid back wall, you'll be happy with this. A relatively kind of crisp sound. I'll be very curious to see how this comes in on the decibel meter. To my ear, sounds just maybe a little bit louder than some of the other bows that we have on test, but we'll check that out coming up. And finally, talking about that grip. It is that ergonomic style grip that Hoyt is known for. You know, as far as that style is concerned, I do like what they do. It actually fits my hand relatively well. All right, overall, a very crisp and snappy offering from the folks over at Hoyt. Let's take this guy inside and take a look at some of the draw force dynamics and other specifications that we're getting out of that new cam system. All right, we are back inside now with the AX-2 32 pulled into that full draw position, ready to take a look at some of the dynamic specifications that help to really correlate to the shooting impressions and ultimately the speeds that we're going to get out on the range. The first thing that I do like to measure is what we call the string-to-string measurement. That is the last point that the string is actually positively putting force into and or supported by the actual cam assembly itself to the same point on the other side. In this particular bow, when we do measure to that loadout point, we are getting almost exactly 33 inches. That same line, so a vertical line from that string-to-string point, is actually going to give us what is our dynamic brace height. That is, whether or not the brace height actually grows or contracts from the last point that we're actually getting positive pressure into that system when we were at full draw. Remember, a lot of manufacturers this year are beginning to advertise that if you are actually able to maintain or even increase that brace height, that dynamic brace height, you actually can resist some amount of torque into the system when you are at full draw and on the shot. Fortunately for Hoyt, as was the case also with their RX-9 Ultra this year, we are seeing that that brace height does grow. So the dynamic brace height on this particular model is coming in very close to 7¼ inches. Next, we will look at the updated axle-to-axle measurement and get a sense for how much limb deflection we're getting out of this particular system. When we measure on this bow, we are getting that is collapsing to about 29 7/8 of an inch, giving us a total limb deflection of 2 11/16 of an inch. So quite a bit of limb deflection coming out of that system. All of that is going to generate our string angle at the back of the bow. All things being equal, I do prefer a larger string angle for pretty much every bow that I am shooting. Really just helps the archer to keep a very vertical head and neck position and easily find reference points, if that's the tip of your nose or other points on your face, when you are at your anchor. This bow is coming in at exactly 35.0 degrees, and that is, again, when this is set to that 30-inch draw position. Speaking of which, let's move up now to the front of the bow here and actually check into the accuracy of their draw length measurement for this module. This one is coming in spot on at exactly 30 inches of draw length from the deepest part of the throat of the grip and the burger button there, or I'm sorry, the burger hole. So really good on Hoyt for a very accurate representation of their draw lengths, as you would expect, since they are advertising incremental draw length abilities out of this new cam assembly. That is going to give us a total power stroke out of this particular bow of 21 9/16 of an inch. Now let's take a look at the draw force curve. As we can see here, a relatively steep climb angle, making this a little bit more aggressive up front, getting very near to and actually hitting that peak weight around that 25% mark. We do get a little bit of noise or, it's not necessarily kind of the smoothest draw cycle that we're seeing from this particular cam system in the middle of the stroke there, but not really something that you notice by the time that you're actually kind of accelerating into that draw. It does begin to actually let off into the valley before that 75% mark and falls off quite precipitously afterwards, ultimately arriving home at 15.8 pounds of holding weight, giving us a true let-off percentage for this particular bow set to 80% let-off by way of those mods of closer to 77.4%. Next, let's take a look at the area under the curve, or the total amount of work required by the archer to get through that power stroke. As we can see, this is coming in with 1,232.8 inch-pounds, or again, the required force to really get through that entire draw cycle. Ultimately, that is going to generate all of our speeds out on the range, which is what we're going to do next. So meet me back outside where we'll get our official speed rating for the Hoyt AX-2 32. All right, we are back out on the range with the Hoyt AX-2 32 with those HBX Gen 4 cams. This one set up at as near as ATA spec as I could get it. It is pulling exactly 69.95 pounds of peak draw weight. It is set to 30 inches of draw, and it is in that 80% let off position. This first arrow will be our match weighted 350 grain arrow. Let's see what kind of speeds we get, again, for that ATA spec. That first arrow going 329.0 feet per second. Next up is our 400 grain arrow. That going 306.6 feet per second. And finally is our 450 grain arrow, again, getting more representative of the type of arrow weights we'd expect to see folks using in an actual kind of hunting setting. That going 291.2 feet per second. All things considered, very good speed coming out of this 32-inch platform from Hoyt this year. All right, we are back inside after getting some really very good shooting performance and speeds out of this particular bow out on the range. As is always the case, we like to shoot a lot of arrows out of these bows to build a nice average to give our official speed rating. And in this case, that is coming in at 326.9 feet per second. I actually shot a total of 11 arrows out of this bow. One of the reasons that I kept going beyond the typical like 8 or 9 that I shoot is that I was getting quite a bit of variability in the speeds that I was getting. The lowest speed that I was getting was actually 323.6 feet per second, and I got a couple of arrows going exactly 329.0 feet per second. But I also had 2 arrows that were going exactly 326.9 feet per second, which is the average that we came up with. So I feel pretty good about that. But either way, we're getting quite a bit of variation as far as the speeds coming out of this particular bow this year. Let's dive in now and talk about some of the different actual features of the bow itself. One thing that Hoyt is advertising that they've moved to is that new HBX Gen 4 cam. That is said to be slightly more aggressive in terms of the overall profile that they do have there, but it is also going to be generating a little bit more speed, which is what they're advertising. One other way that they are talking about getting a little bit more speed and ultimately efficiency out of the actual platform itself is they have moved to a new draw length adjustment. So quite a bit of actual adjustability out of the bow itself. As we can see here, these are new and specific to the HBX Gen 4. They are specific to 1 total inch of draw length adjustment in 1/4 inch steps. So this is the 30-inch draw length mod, and it'll actually allow me to go down to 29 1/4 inches, again in those 1/4 inch increments, and then up to that 30 inches by way of draw. The other little bit of adjustability that we get out of this cam system is the let-off. So as we can see here, these little aluminum feet allow us to alter between 75, 80, and 85% by way of let-off, and then you can actually flip those top to bottom, I believe, to get both a hard and extra hard back wall setting out of the actual system itself. As far as the peak weights for this bow, you do need to order it with those specific limbs in place, and that does come all the way from 40 pounds up to 80 pounds of peak weight. One thing we found with a couple of the Hoyts that we've had in for testing so far this year, they do come in a little bit hot. So, this bow was getting closer to 72 pounds of peak weight in that 70-pound configuration. But you can, of course, dial down the actual peak weight if you want to get something very specific using those limb bolts there in the system. One thing that a lot of manufacturers have really seen as a feature highlight for their bows this year is a lot of out-of-the-box tunability or at-home tuning options for the bows that don't necessarily require a bow press. Unfortunately, we haven't really seen any of that coming from the Hoyts just yet. They are still relying on a traditional through-axle system that requires some shims there to do your left-right paper tail cleanups and your wheeling adjustments, and also no timing features as well. So that's something that I would suspect that we're going to see from the Hoyts next year. They're going to need to come up with something relatively clever because a lot of the ways of actually doing that work have now been patented by some of their rivals in the industry. That said, this bow is actually pretty well tuned as far as I could tell without a sight on it. Right out of the box, it was shooting arrows very straight with nothing other than me just eyeballing a rest on the actual riser there itself. So take that for what it's worth. All right, talking about some of the features of the overall riser design now, let's talk about vibration dampening. Not a lot to talk about because there isn't a whole lot on this particular bow. They've done away with even the limb leg dampeners that we often see. They do come with this shorter stop lower mount stabilizer that does have some weight suspended to the end of a flexible rubber there, so that's probably killing some of the vibration. That said, I didn't feel a whole lot of vibration coming through this particular riser, and again, that was with the bow completely stripped down, so really nothing to report on there. Along with vibration does come, of course, sound. As is always the case, we do like to create a very repeatable method for determining the actual sound ratings or the decibel meter ratings that we do have coming from all of these bows. We place a directional decibel meter pointed directly at the central shooting position of the bow, placed 3 feet from that central shooting position. This is set, as is always the case, to that ATA spec, so 70 pounds of peak draw weight, 30 inches of draw, shooting a 400 grain arrow. And out of this particular bow, we did get 78.4 decibels. Very middle of the pack for the bows that we've had in for testing so far this year and even in years past. All right, diving in now to some of the different mounting interfaces on the bow. Looking at the pick rail that they have here machined into the front of the riser, allowing you to do a pick mount sight and really get a lot of the weight of the system very in line with the actual grip itself. And then, as is always the case, this is double tapped and threaded here on the back so that you can run that traditional dovetail or slider style sight if you do want. As far as the rest mounting interface is concerned, they have gone to the trouble here of machining in that integrate style dovetail on the back, so some of the integrate style rest will just mount up really nicely to the back of the riser there, and then there is a single burger hole here for all of your traditional rests if you want to run those options as well. As far as the stabilizers are concerned, they do maintain both the standard front bar position here right beneath the grip, as well as this lower stabilizer position. Of note, Hoyt is going forward with their Go Sticks and the Go Sticks 2.0. We had done a review of that actually last year. So that is a system that attaches right to the front here, kind of creates a little bipod, if you will, off the front of the bow. And then on this lower cam here, you can see they've got this little metal piece that they've actually machined into or welded to the actual cam there, allowing you to set that bow down using those front two contact points and that back contact point and really keep the actual string channel itself up out of the dirt for you. If you do want to do a back bar, they do have a little area there where you can use that Hoyt specific back bar mount. So an option if you want to run a back bar setup out of this bow. Last but not least, let's talk about the grip. So one thing that Hoyt is really known for is their more ergonomic style grip. You can see here it's kind of rubberized and contoured to the shape of the average hand. I'm a bigger fan personally of more of a kind of squared off target style grip. That said, I have shot a Hoyt bow in years past that does have this exact same grip on it, and I found it to be very comfortable and repeatable. It's also nice too because having that rubber texture there is pretty grippy, and it actually insulates your hand from heat dissipation or what we would feel is cold in that aluminum riser. And then last but not least, they are continuing forward with their wire WRX strings, which you can see kind of demarcated right there, and cables. I've always found Hoyt's strings to be of really pretty good quality and very durable for me. All of that is coming to you for $1,549 at MSRP. If you liked this review, please give us a like, subscribe. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Ultimately, we are getting very close to the end of reviewing all of our longer axle-to-axle flagship hunting bows for 2025. Shortly thereafter, I'm going to come back to you with a review of reviews where we take a look at all of the different measurements, all the different specs that we're getting out of these bows, and we do a crossbow comparison, really looking for what we believe is the best bow for 2025. I hope you'll join us for that.